We're fine. Let's... Alright, let's go. We departed Edo with the intention of following wherever Hijikata-san led our remaining comrades. We gathered word that the Shinsengumi had regrouped with the Denshu Company en route to Nikko. From what I understood, the Denshu Company was comprised of former Imperial Army men who were well versed with Western tactics and armaments. Okita and I took refuge in the depths of the in the forest paths during the afternoons to avoid the harsh sunlight. Right. Huh? Nothing. With that said, Okita continued stepping through the brush to find a suitable resting place. I refrained from mentioning anything about it, but I noticed that the sword in his hips wasn't the one he'd usually use. Rather, it was a sword... Oh god, I gotta say this one again. It was a sword named the Yamashiro no Kami Fujiwara Kunikiyo, which he received as a personal gift from Kondo-san. If he were wielding that sword on our trip to locate Hijikata-san, it signified how personally he regarded this quest. I wondered to myself if everything would be okay. If something were to provoke Okita into a furious rage, would I have a chance of stopping him? I could only tend to these thoughts in silence, and I peeked up to watch the moon slowly descend into the horizon amidst the breaking of a new dawn. Okita found a quiet area underneath an old soaring tree, and we tried to make ourselves comfortable when... I heard the distant howl of a yobiku. A soldier screamed from afar. Yobiku. A whistle. Oh. Okay. Okita! We had been spotted by a roaming troop of Imperial forces who were approaching us rapidly. The minute we were forced to leave the refuge of the shade, I felt an immediate queasiness. Okita muttered smugly to himself before unsheathing his mighty sword from the scabbard on his hips. Okita! I knew that he was still in a relatively unstable state. Activating his fury powers was a huge risk. No. Before now, I would have normally nodded and obeyed his orders without question. But now... I'm going to fight beside you. I unsheathed my kodachi. It's not as if they're demons. I'm sure I'll be able to manage myself. If we fight together, then it means we'll be rid of them even faster, right? I refuse to let you be the only one to put yourself in harm's way. On the day we encountered Kazuma, I recall feeling an overwhelming sense of power coming from within in order to fend him off. If I could just harness those powers once more. Okita sighed. I heard another whistle, and this time, the sound came from a closer vicinity than before. Before we knew it, the Imperial Army troops emerged from the bush and had us surrounded. Ah.
それじゃ行こうか千鶴ちゃん
I nodded at Okita and together we charged.
撃て
The soldiers all had their rifles pointed straight at us, and their leader gestured them all to shoot.
バカだな撃たせるわけないでしょ
Okita closed the distance between himself and an enemy soldier in the span of a second. Oh, he's enjoying this. It was almost impossible to believe. He was moving at a superhuman pace, slicing through the soldiers' limbs in the blink of an eye. The soldier raised his rifle to fire another round at Okita, but he was... Okita kicked against the ground, leaping high above the soldier, whose draw was no match for Okita's. He scarcely had any time to flinch, let alone dodge. The soldier's blood splattered onto a nearby tree. Yeah, he's enjoying this a little bit too much! I shivered watching his sadistic display of sword mastery. With impeccable precision, he wove through the soldiers' formation and slayed 2 men in one movement. Holy shit. The soldiers who became the highest ranking officer amongst his slain comrades signaled his men to shoot. Just then, one of the bullets pierced through my calf. Blood began seeping into my clothes. I nearly toppled over from the searing pain, which was burning intensely from the spot of the wound. In almost no time, the bullet hole began to close. I'm okay! This is nothing! I didn't want to worry Okita. I took deep breaths and stood tall. I stood tall. I caught a nearby soldier off guard and drove my kodachi through his heart. His rifle fell from his hands, clanging to the floor. It should be ground! Okita instinctively kicked the rifle off to the side, winking at me for killing the soldier. Suddenly, the high-ranking officer pointed his rifle straight towards me, catching me from behind. But it was for naught. Yo, did that just cut off by itself? What the fuck? Okita barked loudly to capture the attention of the remaining soldiers before moving to slash at each of them one by one. Every time one would raise their rifle, it was hopeless, and Okita would close the difference before splitting them open with his katana. As soon as he had slain all of the soldiers in our vicinity, Okita shouted out at me. Even if it meant my kodachi would have to draw blood, I wanted so badly to fight alongside Okita. Not like I wanted to get myself killed. But I could respect that it was Okita's way of conveying his concern, unusual as it may seem. Wakatta. I nodded. Just then, oh! Yo, they know! They know! They know! A rustle came from behind us. We saw an Imperial captain quickly loading particular-looking bullets into his gun. Were they silver bullets? Okita! Duck! I screamed Okita's name in hopes of alerting him. Then suddenly, a kunai knife was flung from out of nowhere, landing in the captain's neck. It cut straight through his carotid artery. Oh god, these words. And he fell to the ground. I have a sneaking suspicion who it might be. This knife, it must have come from... Yes! That voice, it's...
山崎君、君生きてたんだ。甲府の戦いの時以来姿が見えなかったから。てっきり死んじゃったんだと思ってたのに。
何者だ？貴様も新選組の者か？
しんがりは俺が務めます。お二人ともどうかご無事で。千鶴ちゃん、こっちへ。
Okita glanced at me and spoke curtly, gesturing for the two of us to sprint down the mountain path. After he gave the go-ahead, I ran right after him. A row of Imperial reinforcements got into a formation at the mouth of the path to fire their rifles, but luckily, we proved difficult targets to hit amidst the thick bush of trees. Is Yamazaki's missing his sword in the sprite? That's an error. What? Does this sprite exist? Did I catch an error? Because his sword is clearly not in his scabbard and also not in his hand. The fuck? Yamazaki left from branch to branch, narrowly avoiding fire as he threw more kunai knives, but then... No! Yamazaki! I heard what I thought was Yamazaki's pain groan behind us, and I instinctively stopped running. Yamazaki, however, attempted to brush it off. I used his words as motivation, fighting back tears as we distance ourselves from the fracas. Oh god! Phew. Before I realized it, the sun had finally set, producing brilliant orange hues that shined from the west. We paused for a moment to listen if there were any enemies marching towards us on the trail. It seemed as though we had in fact lost them. Yeah, that's because we ran in fucking sunlight. Yamazaki, let me see your wounds. Yamazaki walked over to me gingerly, and I was careful to peel open his clothing that was soaked in blood. This doesn't look too good. I couldn't help but worry aloud. By some stroke of divine luck, any bullets that landed pierced straight through the flesh, a small source of comfort if any could be taken. But even so, the wound under his ribcage hadn't clotted, so it required my immediate attention. But here... After I finished applying some first aid, Okita immediately jumped into a line of questioning. Yamazaki looked down for a minute, pausing to choose his words carefully as he stroked his chin. So it was a coincidence that you bumped into us? Yamazaki's eyes thinned.
君たちを見つけたのは数日前だ。
Boy has been watching us. What? Why would you wait until now?
声をかけることができなかったんだ。局長のことは聞いているな。
I nodded.
なるほど。僕を土方さんに会わせたくなかったってこと。僕があの人を殺しちゃうかもしれないから。
Yamazaki neither confirmed nor denied Okita's claim, and instead he stared back blankly. Okita, however, seemed unbothered by the lack of response, and he just chuckled.
僕としたことがうかつだな。何日も君に見張られてたのに気づかなかったなんて。それだけ疲れが溜まっておられるということでしょう。それは否定しないけどさ。ま、君がいなかったら僕たちとっくに殺されてただろうし、そのことに関してはお礼を言ってあげてもいいかな。ありがとう。
Oh, Yamazaki is surprised at the thanks. No! Considering these two absolutely do not get along at all, hearing Okita say thanks, major surprise.
どうしたの？いえ、まさか沖田さんの口からそのような言葉を聞くことになるとは思わなかったもので。失礼なことを言ってくれるな。じゃあさっきのは撤回するよ。
For a little while, Yamazaki looked poised to speak, but then he contemplated again as he thought of the right way to phrase his question.
もし副長に会えたら、あなたはどうするおつもりですか？まだ決めてないよ。実際のところ、僕もまだわからないんだ。
Okita has lost the person that he respected and looked up to the most. Yamazaki still has the person that he follows, which is Hijikata. I can understand Yamazaki's protectiveness and, like, what the fuck are you going to do when you find Hijikata? I'm worried about what he's gonna do once he finds Hijikata. But if he has no idea what the fuck he's gonna do, I don't know. This is strange for Okita. This is really strange, and I'll admit it.
あの人を切っちゃうかもしれないし、逆に僕の方が切られるかもしれない。新選組は近藤局長と土方副長のお二人で作り上げたもの。いわばお二人の夢そのものです。知ってるよ。近藤局長は何があっても決して副長を死なせたいとは思っておられないはずです。それも知ってる。
Yamazaki stared intently into Okita's eyes, trying to parse his intentions. We all stood alone, and the whistle of the breeze behind us rustled leaves scattered amongst the ground. Eventually,
新選組の皆は今宇都宮城にいます。
Yamazaki revealed the location without blinking, and he continued to stare back at Okita.
あの人を土方副長を頼みます。
He uttered this wish to us aloud, and Okita nodded silently. What are you going to do now, Yamazaki?
俺はここで休んでいく。少し喋りすぎた。
No! Oh god! Uh... but...
千鶴ちゃん行こう
Hello! I'm gonna refer to you as Kay. I'm doing Okita's route right now. And I'm doing all 12 routes actually, or 13 routes. But we're doing Okita's right now. And when we're done, we're gonna start all over with Hijikata. But also I I'm gonna I'm in sad mode right now. Well, I'm doing this all for purposes of 2 video scripts, so I might as well. I'm doing a top 12 list and then a missed opportunities video because there's quite a few in here. Anyway.
山崎君今までずっと働き詰めだったんだし少し休ませてあげなきゃ
I don't like the word rest here. I really don't. With that said, he looked over at Yamazaki with a friendly gleam in his eyes.
土方副長にお伝えください少し遅れますが必ず合流しますと
After heeding Yamazaki's request, we continued our way back down the mountain. God. No! I swear to God. Please don't be the last time we don't see Yamazaki. Oh! Shit. Back to default, hopefully. We set our sights for Utsunomiya Castle, just as Yamazaki had told us.
敵の気配がなくなったからここからは早く進めそうだね
It was nice to know that we wouldn't have any trouble with soldiers like we did earlier that day, but...
どうしたの立ち止まって行くよ
Okita. When we arrived at Utsunomiya Castle, I wonder what Okita plans on doing. Even he had doubts about what would happen once we encountered Hijikata-san. There was the slightest chance that one of them would not live to see a second conversation between the two. But even then... Do you really have to go to Utsunomiya Castle?
今さらその質問ここで江戸に戻ったら何のためにここまで来たのかわからないじゃない
But...
まあどうしても行きたくないんならここで待っててくれても構わないけど
What? I wanted him to stay behind, but that didn't mean that I wanted to get left behind on my own. But... Okita!
何
What should I tell him? Oh. The guide says... Don't fucking kill him. Please don't kill Hijikata-san. Okita responded with a sharp glance.
僕はできない約束はしないことにしてるんだ
This boy, I swear. But, like Yamazaki said, I don't think Kondo-san would have wanted Hijikata-san to die. Could you really live with killing someone who also meant so much to Kondo-san? I just couldn't bring myself to think like Okita did. Okita had threatened to stab or kill me so many times, even spanning back to the days I joined the Shinsengumi. It had occurred so often back then, I lost track. Okita had a penchant for violence, only matched by his fondness for keeping true to his threats. However, there was a difference between killing an enemy of the Shinsengumi and Hijikata-san of all people. Even for Okita, I couldn't imagine ever having to confront that possibility. I don't want you to have to suffer anymore.
Chizuru-chan.
My words appeared to catch him off guard. Okita was hesitant to answer right away, and he looked back at me sadly. Eventually,
これから殺されるかもしれない土方さんじゃなくて、僕の心配をしてくれるんだ。
I don't know how to respond to this.
さすがにそれは土方さんに同情しちゃうな。
God fucking damn it, Okita! Well, that's not what I said. I mean...
分かってるよ。でも、僕はあの人に会わなきゃいけない。それは分かってくれるよね。
Okita seemed unsure of what exactly he'd hoped to gain from seeing Hijikata-san as well. And because of that uncertainty, he couldn't promise to me that either of their blood wouldn't be spilled. It was difficult to shake the anxiety that had been slowly festering in my heart, but for his sake, I could understand why Okita was intent on doing what he needed to do. So I said, "Okay." All I could do was nod. Between us, there was a brief moment of silence. It's time for round 3! Suddenly, Okita had crumpled to the ground, and then... his hair turned white and his eyes turned red. Okita! Was he having another seizure? Oh no, to make matters worse, he seemed to be suffering in more agony than any of his previous episodes. I know we consult the guide, but I think we all know the answer at this point. Once more, I unsheathed my kodachi and slid the blade across the veins of my wrist. Okita, drink my blood. He did not hesitate this time. Ah, wait, yeah, no, that's right, that's correct, actually. He did not hesitate because he made a vow. He drew near me, salivating at the mouth. His red eyes flickered with relief. As he gently licked the blood flowing from my fresh wound, he muttered softly, "Okita." His words wiped any feelings of reservations that I had been holding from our recent conversation. By giving him a taste of my blood, he was able to preserve his sanity and, most importantly, his life. Okita needed my blood. For this alone, I felt vindicated. It was all worth it. After Okita's painful seizure had died down, we tried leaving again for Utsunomiya Castle, but... Okita suddenly motioned for me to stop. Is something wrong? Right as I had asked him. Oh, that actually surprised me! Ah! The sound of cannon fire cracked loudly in the distance, and I screamed as the ground shook beneath us. What was that sound? Oh no! Okita had no time to answer me, and he began running towards a small hill nearby. There we go. Seeing him sprint, I rushed to follow him. What we saw was... over there! Utsunomiya Castle was flooded with enemy soldiers, and the whole estate was engulfed in a fiery blaze. Cannon fire followed the loud sparks of nearby enemy commanders, ordering their men to fire at the castle. The shogunate forces were desperately trying to counter the bombastic assault, but it was clear from our view that they were at a disadvantage. Okita's face looked as if he were concocting a plan in the meantime, and he walked down the hill. Okita, what are we going to do? I nodded. However, we heard the sound of marching soldiers approaching us. That's terrible timing. Please be friendly. Never mind, it's not friendly. Okita grabbed my hand, and together we ran out of sight and hid behind a large bush. Soldiers clad in Western uniforms walked right past our hiding spot. Okita and I held our breaths, waiting for them to pass without detecting us. Luckily, it seemed no one had spotted us, and I glanced at Okita when the footsteps were no longer audible. Right. Suddenly. Oh no. Oh! I was struck with a dizzy spell. My head throbbed as if it were being squeezed against the ground, and I became overwhelmed with nausea. I'm fine. Okita rushed to place his arm around my shoulders to prevent me from toppling over. I shook my head. I don't want blood. I think my body is trying to fight off the poisonous effects of the water of life. Oops, did I skip it? I felt as though my body would concord into a ball. I bit my lip aggressively, fighting to endure the pain as I mustered a smile at Okita. I'm fine. No matter how agonizing this felt, it was nothing compared to what Okita had been suffering up until now. I had no room to complain over something like this. I can walk. Sorry for being a bother. Oh, this is the worst moment for this. Okita?
大丈夫。ちょっと咳込んだだけだから。とっくに起き上がれなくなっててもおかしくない体を羅刹の力で無理やり動かしてるようなものだから。
Why is this such the worst timing ever?
お互いもうボロボロだね。
Okita, you should rest. Okita cut me off.
君が大丈夫ならもう行くよ。この機会を逃すとまた土方さんを見失いそうだから。
Okita was right. He was, by sheer force of will, dragging his decaying body wherever he needed to go to locate Hijikata-san. It was admirable, if not terribly foolish. I'm fine. I still had my doubts about what would happen if Hijikata-san and Okita were to meet again, but even so, there was nothing I could say or do to stop him from going.
苦しくなったらいつでも言って。
He spoke kindly, and he held my hand to lead us back down the path. There were times when I heard Okita hacking his lungs up as he coughed, but we supported each other's body as we proceeded carefully down the path. Please tell me we found them. There was a peaceful pause in our conversation until... Okita...
何?
Maybe it was better that I didn't ask him this. But it was something that had been bothering me. So, if we were, in fact, able to see Hijikata-san, what do you plan on doing? Or have you still not made up your mind? It seemed presumptuous for me to ask. But Okita seemed unoffended by my question, and he smiled brightly as he answered.
僕が近藤さんに初めて会ったのはね、まだ数えで9つの時だったんだ。
His response perplexed me, and I listened closely. His story came from out of nowhere, but it was one of the first times Okita had opened up to me.
父上も母上も早くに亡くなって、姉上もお嫁に行くことになって、僕の面倒を見たがる人なんて誰もいなかったから、内弟子として司令官に預けられたんだ。捨てられたって思ったよ。姉上も兄上も僕なんていらなかったんだろうって。
Okita laughed dryly, but my heart felt like it had been shattered into pieces hearing him reminisce. Oh God.
剣術道場って体が大きくて気が荒い人ばかりでさ、一番年下で体が小さかった僕はいつまで経っても下っ端扱いで、しょっちゅう嫌がらせや折檻をされてた。そんな中、唯一優しくしてくれたのが近藤さんだったんだ。姉上に捨てられて、世の中に味方なんて誰もいないって拗ねてた僕に、世の中に意味のないことなんてない、僕がこんな運命をたどることになったのもきっと意味があるはずだって言ってくれて、何もできないって思い込んでた僕に剣に生きる道を教えてくれた。僕は近藤さんに出会えたから生まれ変われたんだ。それからしばらくして土方さんが司令官に出入りするようになってさ、最初の頃はっていうか今もだけど、あの人のこと大嫌いだったよ。お金持ちの農家のお坊ちゃんで、食べるのに困ったことなんてほとんどなさそうで、なのに近藤さんは土方さんのことが大のお気に入りでさ、土方さんに「あんたは大名になれる」って言われるたび嬉しそうな顔になって、近藤さん土方さんと話すときは目の色が全然違うんだ。
Okita sheepishly looked up at the stars above us, altogether radiating like a tapestry in the bright sky. Okita. I was gaining a much clearer picture of how Okita became the man he was. Hijikata-san had been there since the beginning, since Okita's most cherished memories of Kondo-san. Although there were days, I'm sure, that he was dismissive of Hijikata-san, I suppose he could never bring himself to hate him. I think I finally get it. To Okita, Hijikata-san was a person of great consequence. Although his reverence would never match Kondo-san's, there was a noticeable level of respect. Let's hurry up and find Hijikata-san. We don't want to miss him again.
君は僕を止めるつもりでついてきたんじゃないの?
To be quite honest with you, until we had talked about it, I had my reservations, but I found it difficult to articulate this properly, but it mattered that I had made my feelings known to him. But after hearing where you stand on the whole thing, I think us finding Hijikata-san would be good. Okita held Kondo-san in a great regard that was untouchable to anyone else. But more importantly, he understood that Hijikata held his own independent reverence for Kondo-san. If the reunion meant they could share those sentiments, perhaps to bask in the memories of their lost friend, then everything would be okay. I have faith in you. I knew that Okita possessed good within him, and that ultimately, I could trust whatever decision he made. Okita glanced at me with surprise, staring silently for a moment, but then, suddenly, he grabbed my arm to pull me in closely. His arms wrapped around me, and I was beside his chest. Okita?
いきなりごめん。
He whispered intimately, and I could hear a little bit of doubt lingering behind his words.
どうしてかわからないけど、君を抱きしめたくてたまらない。
His fingers locked around the dimples of my back, and I buried my face into his soft collarbone. I couldn't speak anymore. My heart beat like a war drum inside of my chest.
さっきみたいに誰かに気持ちを分かってもらえたのは久しぶりな気がして。
His voice quivered, making his admission all the more sincere.
切なくて抑えきれないんだ。本当にごめん。
He hugged me awkwardly, but my love for him was blossoming so fully nonetheless. Okita. His warmth gave me comfort, and I leaned into his soft, supple arms. There was nothing that made me happier than being locked into his tender embrace, feeling his cool breath tickle my forehead gently. I was a little worried he would catch sight of my blushed cheeks, or that the steady beat of my heart would make him nervous. However, he paid no mind to my anxieties. Instead, squeezed even tighter to melt my worries away.
君って本当に不思議な子だね。
He tightened his loving embrace again, while smirking kindly as he whispered into my ear.
いつの間にか僕の心の中に入り込んできて、今みたいに僕が一番欲しい言葉をくれるなんて。
I could sense he was a little embarrassed. You make me so happy. Sharing this intimate moment with Okita, when the world around us seemed to be falling apart. We couldn't help but succumb to the hypnotic lull of our passionate embrace. I never wanted to let this moment slip from my memory. It was as transient as it was beautiful, and I savored every part of it. Eventually, his arms loosened their grip, and he reluctantly let go of me. We playfully glanced back and forth at one another for a while as we made our way down the path. Insects chirped lively all around us, and Okita punctuated the noise by timidly speaking. So about the slithering into his heart part. The man is somehow slithered into mine. And to think that after this, we're going back to the Okita that I scream at about 25% of the time and race the counter. Oh boy. Water break. Please remember to drink water. Or tea, because Edo Blossom is usually the one that delivers all of the fucking tea. We continued down the wooded path, following what we believed to be tracks matching Hijikata's frame. Finally, as dawn began to break in the east, we had found Hijikata-san. Hi, boss! Hijikata-san waved off his bodyguard and he turned to face us. Okita's eyes grew wide. All of a sudden, Okita threw himself at Hijikata-san, grabbing his collar with both hands. Holy...
どうしてしがみついてでも近藤さんを止めなかったんです。助ける方法なんていくらでもあったはずでしょう。他の誰にできなくても土方さんならできたはずだ。できなかったんだよ。
Hijikata-san cut Okita off, barking at the top of his lungs. He was seething, and his eyes glowed with anger and regret in equal parts.
俺は助けたかった。助けようとしたんだよ。好き好んで近藤さんを見捨てたわけじゃねえ。司令官にいた人間の中で近藤さんを本物の侍にしてって一番思ってたのは誰だと思ってるんだ。
Okita's hands shook violently as they loosened their grip on Hijikata-san's collar.
それでも近藤さんは死んじゃったじゃないですか。
Okita was on the verge of tears, and he averted his gaze to avoid Hijikata-san's intense stare. The hands, which moments earlier shook with a vengeful rage, were now limp and powerless. And then... Okita caught Hijikata off guard by activating his fury powers, and he threw a relentless flurry of punches at Hijikata-san's face. Okita! No!
これで勘弁してあげますよ。許すわけじゃないですけど。
Hijikata-san slowly rose from the ground, begrudgingly wiping the blood from his mouth.
前の僕なら本当に土方さんを切ってたかもしれませんけど、でも今は。
Hijikata-san offered no words of defiance or rebuttal, and instead he took in everything Okita was saying. And then...
敵に投降する前、近藤さんは俺に言ったんだ。もう楽にさせてくれないかってな。結局、俺がやってたことはただの自己満足で、あの人の本心なんざ全然分かってなかったのかもしれない。
本当ですよね。今日になんて行かずに司令官の道場主のままでいれば、近藤さんだってひどい殺され方をして首をさらされたりなんてしなかったはずなのに。
Although Okita lamented what could have been, his tone was no longer accusatory on the part of Hijikata-san.
土方さんはこれからどうするんですか？
近藤さんに新選組を託されたんだ。今さら放り出すわけにはいかねえよ。俺は大使を連れて北を目指すが、お前らはどうするんだ？
僕は土方さんと一緒には行けません。
Hijikata-san shut his eyes, giving me the impression that he had expected Okita to say as much. Instead of urging him to join, Hijikata-san merely sighed in acceptance of his old comrade's position.
そうか。
Hijikata-san nodded, and while the two of them mutually understood that their paths would soon diverge, neither of them were bothered either way. There's something I need to tell you as well, Hijikata-san.
なんだ？
We encountered Yamazaki. He was pretty badly wounded the last time we saw him, and since then, he'd separated from us. He wanted me to tell you that he promises he will find you soon. Hijikata's eyes thin, and he was visibly shaken by my news. Oh. However, in typical fashion, he gritted his teeth, and his following response was strained.
そうか。わざわざ伝えてくれてありがとうよ。掃除のこと頼んだぜ。
Please take care of yourself too, Hijikata-san. Hijikata-san gave a mild grin. Then he turned his back towards us to walk away. Once Hijikata-san had gotten out of earshot, Okita spoke up softly.
バカだよね、土方さんは。
Eh?
近藤さんの本心を全然分かってなかったかもしれないとか、単なる自己満足だったのかもしれないとか言ってたけど、そんなはずないじゃない。ねえ。司令官にいた人たちはみんな近藤さんのことが大好きだったけど、近藤さんは大名になれる人だって本気で言ってたのは土方さんと三男さんだけだったんだから。 僕が近藤さんに出会って生まれ変われたのと同じで、近藤さんも土方さんに出会ったことで生まれ変われたに決まってるよ。そのせいで罪人として処刑されるなんて皮肉にも程があるけどさ。
Okita took a deep breath of the chilly evening air, and he turned to face me.
それじゃあ僕たちもそろそろ行こうか。
Get going? Where are we going to?
あれ、コードーさんを探すため君の故郷に行くんじゃないの？もしかして忘れちゃった？
No, of course not. But are you sure that's where you want to go?
コードーさんは落ち水の毒を消す方法を知ってるかもしれないんだよね。
Well, at least according to Sen.
じゃあ僕も一緒に行くよ。落ち水の毒に蝕まれて血に狂うなんて君には似合わないから。僕は君を助けたいんだ。だから最後の最後まで諦めない。
Okita's kind smile carried with it a hint of melancholia. I'm gonna go with that. I couldn't help but worried about what it all meant. I want to save you too. Although his words were emotionally resonant for me, there was a foreboding feeling I couldn't shake, and I sensed that Okita could still slip into darkness. Was I, too, susceptible to this darkness? I was helpless against whatever fate was waiting for us. When I awoke, the sun was gradually descending into the horizon from the west. To my surprise, I found a welcoming face that was quite eager to greet me.
おはよう、千鶴ちゃん。ちゃんと眠れた？
I did. How about you, Okita? Are you feeling rested?
ぐっすり眠れたよ。
You're lying, aren't you?
ひどいな。決めつけなくてもいいのに。
Well, lately, little by little, I've been starting to notice when you're telling the truth and when you're lying.
そうなの？便利だけど、ちょっとめんどくさくなりそうかな。
What? Annoying?
いちいち怒らなくてもいいじゃない。ただの冗談なんだから。
Ugh. I don't want you to push yourself. Please rest.
無理してるつもりはないんだけどな。自分の体だし。
I don't believe you, Okita.
じゃあ眠くなるまで何か面白い話でもしてくれる？
A bedtime story.
小さな子供を寝かしつけるとき、昔話とかするでしょ？
Okita's idea reminded me of how my father used to tell me stories as he tucked me gently into my futon when I was a young girl. So, were you told bedtime stories when you were a child, Okita?
あるよ。毎晩ではなかったけどね。市営館に来たばかりの頃は、しょっちゅう近藤さんが来てくれて、よく面白い話をしてくれた。いつも三国志とか水古伝ばっかりで、最後の方は筋書きを全部覚えちゃったぐらいだったけど。
Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a novel describing the turbulent period of Chinese history that began with the late Han Dynasty and lasted for nearly 100 years, known as the Kingdoms era. Inexplicably popular in Japan, One must only look at the recent game Fire Emblem Three Houses to realize, yeah. Or any Dynasty Warriors games. Any Musou game. Suikoden, a story written in China during the Song Dynasty. It tells the tale of heroes gathering near a fortress on Mount Liang to save China from terror. I don't think I've heard Suikoden at all. Three Kingdoms, that's just popular fucking everywhere. Whoa, wait. No, hold on. Did I miss anything? No. Why is this Suikoden and the other is Water Margin? What? I can picture it so clearly.
誰に対しても優しくて強くてすごく努力家でずっと近藤さんの後をついていきたいってそう思ってた。
Would he have ran? If Kondo-san genuinely asked Okita to run, would he? That is a genuine question I have now. Ooh. Okita. You're a lucky man, Okita. Okita, I think you should count yourself as a very lucky man for having such a positive influence in your life at a young age.
近藤さんと出会ってなければ今以上にひねくれたどうしようもない人間に育ってたのは確かだろうね。
Hey? That's not what I meant.
わかってるよ。でも僕こういう性格だし。で、続きはどうして僕を幸せ者だと思うの？
When I first met everyone in the Shinsengumi, I had written it off as a stroke of bad luck.
だろうね。
But then, as I grew more comfortable around everyone, I was able to learn so much more about them and myself than I could ever have imagined.
その知ったことっていいことばかりじゃなかったでしょ。君のお父さんが人を化け物に変える薬の研究をしてたなんて知らない方が良かったと思うんだけど。
Yeah, that's not what I meant. I mean, that was quite the surprise. But if my father was committing all of the egregious, if my father was committing all of the egregious acts that I'd learn about later, then I don't think it would be right for me to bury my head in the sand. There is a sense of perspective that only emerges when you experience pain and suffering.
君って前向きだよね。もし君が子供の頃の僕と同じように育ったとしても、きっと僕みたいにはならないんだろうな。
Huh? Are you... Was he complimenting me? I don't know, did that sound like a compliment? Or was he simply commenting that I was a hopeless... Or was he simply commenting that I was as hopeless as he joked I was?
世の中にはさ、人の悪意とか醜い感情と全然縁がない人がいるんだよね。そういう人は誰からもひどく恨まれたり憎まれたりはしない。そういうところ、近藤さんに少し似てるかも。
What? My heart suddenly melted in my chest. To Okita, Kondo was the paragon of kindness, a figure who represented every trait Okita respected.
あれ？どうしたの？顔が赤いけど。
Well, you said that Kondo-san and I are similar, And I don't deserve such a kind compliment. Okita chuckled.
君って変わった女の子だよね。近藤さんに似てるって言われて照れるなんてさ。
Well, to be fair, it was a little strange of Okita to compare a woman he loved to a man he viewed as a father.
何にしても人との巡り合わせって不思議だよね。もし君が今ここにいてくれなかったら僕とっくに死んでたかもしれないし。
Okita. Kondo-san played such an important role in Okita's development, and Okita was still learning how to cope with that loss. One thing was certain. When Okita said he likely would have died a long time ago, I agreed with him. To me, all that mattered was that I could be beside him when it really mattered. I didn't say as much to his face, but it was something that made me smile.
ねえ、千鶴ちゃん。正直言ってまだ近藤さんがいない世の中で生きていくのには慣れてないんだけど、それでもまだ僕には戦う理由が残ってる。だから大丈夫だよ。君が思うほど僕は弱くないから。
I knew that he was telling me the truth. It wasn't as if I had any reason to doubt Okita, but there was still a part of me that knew he was trying to protect himself by feigning emotional strength. That's just the kind of man Okita was.
薫のことも気になるし、君の故郷にたどり着くにはもうしばらくかかる。安心して。君には僕がついてるから。
Okita had a way of soothing my concerns that was unlike anyone else, and he reached for my hand.
平気だよ。二人ならきっと乗り越えられる。
Okita. I clasped his hand in return, and I nodded deeply. Let's do it together. The two of us. Wherever Okita will go, I will be right beside him. As long as he was there to grab my hand, there was nothing I believe we couldn't do. No matter what waited for us in the long road ahead, we could conquer it together. Beyond that, together, we could forge a new future for ourselves. As we watched the amber sunset merge with the indigo sky, we gathered our resolve and we set off for my village. Chapter 4. Not how I expected we'd start this chapter. Someone is calling out my name. Surrounding me in a vibrant meadow covered in a gorgeous blanket of wildflowers. In the distance, I recognize our small home situated in a village hidden deep in the mountains. This is where we lived. Our modest but idle life. And then one day, our village was set ablaze. The flames split into the sky, filling it with an ominous crimson haze. Someone precious had been calling out to me. Suddenly, the ground around my feet was littered with an array of atrophied corpses? Atrophied corpses. each body marked with a mortifying expression. My lungs were filled with the char of smoke, making it difficult to catch my breath. Then I blacked out. As I regained consciousness, someone was carrying me.
あと少しで山を越えられる。もう少しだけこらえてくれ。
The man panted heavily as he carried me through our swift escape down a forested trail.
それにしてもむごいことをするものだ。倒幕への協力を断られたからといって村に火をつけるなど。
Even though I was but a child, I realized that my innocence, my home, all of those things would never return to me. The further we fled from the village that we called home, the more my heart filled with terror, and my eyes filled uncontrollably with tears. A voice echoed from out of nowhere, as if it had entered my brain like a curse. The sound of the mysterious voice spewing its indignant cries came into a cacophonous harmony with my desperate sobbing. All of my dying clan's resentments and sorrow manifested into a haunting condemnation. I hate them. Their words became my words, and the same bitter sentiment left my mouth.
じゃあ、千鶴ちゃん。
This voice. My eyes widened, and it was Okita staring back at me with a concerned expression. Was I just dreaming all of that?
大丈夫？ずいぶんうなされてたみたいだけど。もしかして怖い夢でも見た？
Yeah, it wasn't that. I'm just still adjusting to sleeping at this hour. Don't worry about me. For some reason, I felt too embarrassed to look Okita in the eye, so I fidgeted and stared at the ground.
下手な嘘はやめたら。人間って得て増えてがあるんだから。
What? I'm not lying! I shouted impulsively at him, rushing to clap my hands over my mouth as soon as the words came out. Okita was taken aback by my surprising outburst, and for a while he seemed offended, but he shifted into a more sympathetic approach.
ごめん。君のことが心配だったから。
No, I should be the one apologizing. He was only showing me concern, so it was unfair of me to yell at him. I wondered what compelled me to do so. It was difficult to discern or trust my own feelings. Something nasty began to fester in the pit of my stomach. I needed to take better care of myself. I began to wonder if becoming a fury would not only deteriorate my body, but my mind as well.
君の話聞かせてくれる？
His urge was curt but gentle, and I thought it was a good opportunity to open up about how I felt. I took deep breaths, making it easier for me to gather my thoughts coherently before I spoke. I had a flashback, just a little one, about my childhood. Back then, we lived in a remote, peaceful village. But one day, for whatever reason, an army of humans marched into our village armed with weapons. As I searched for details of the memory, I bit my lip. I realized that I was uncovering a deeply buried trauma that had been waiting for me all my life. They lit the village on fire, and my parents, as well as other demons we knew, were all murdered. All we wanted was a life of peace and solitude. Recounting the story triggered all of my hateful feelings once more, brewing like a storm in my heart. Whatever selfish reasons they had, they killed men, women, children, everyone! Everyone! An entire village who only wanted peace! I was aware that most people aspired to obey their inherent goodness, hoping to triumph over evil. I knew this was not the truth for all men. There were men who took pleasure from their evil deeds.
Chizuru-chan.
Okuta gazed at me longingly, reaching his hand out to mine as a gesture of comfort. However, I couldn't reciprocate it. I don't know what to think anymore! I never ever imagined myself as someone who would let their resentment consume herself. I suppose that my bitterness had nowhere to go, and the tiny flame within me grew and grew until it had become a wildfire intent on getting vengeance. Now, I wanted nothing more than the families of those who destroyed my village to suffer in agony for generations, until they could no longer even conceive of hope. As such thoughts simmered fiercely in my mind, I suddenly gasped in shock.
今はあんまり思い詰めない方がいいよ。喉乾いたでしょ。水筒も空になっちゃったから、僕近くの川で水を汲んでくる。君はここで待ってて。何かあったらすぐに僕を呼ぶんだよ。
Okay. Be careful. Okuta jumped through the bushes to look for the river. Sweat dripped down my forehead, and I wiped off a thick layer with the back of my hand as I sighed. Just then, I heard grass rustling underneath heavy footsteps, only a little distance from where I was sitting. Okuta, did you forget something? When the voice didn't respond, a wet chill crept down the length of my spine. It wasn't Okita. I held my breath anxiously, waiting for an answer. Kaoru, what are you doing here?
俺も一応新政府軍に協力してる立場ではあるからさ。お前らの動きぐらい簡単につかめるよ。宇都宮城で新政府軍と戦ったことも、その後北を目指してたこともね。お前たちが新選組のやつらと別行動をとって北に向かう理由なんて一つしかないじゃないか。
Kaoru smirked with his suggestive tone, and he started approaching me slowly. With each step he took, I nervously took a step back.
少しは思い出したか。俺たちが子供の頃のこと。人間どもみたいに互いに争ったりせず、つつましく生きてた俺たちが、なぜか何もかも失わなきゃならなかった。人間どもよりずっと強い体を持ってる俺たちがだよ。理不尽だと思わないか。強いやつが報われるんじゃない。正しいやつが成功するんじゃない。 どんな時でも手段を選ばずに小ずるく立ち回ったやつだけだ。
I think if Kaoru had confronted me with this monologue just days ago, I would have dismissed it outright. But now, our village was destroyed by humans, wasn't it? I was reminded of the nightmare I had just had, and though going back further, I recalled what Sen had told me before as well.
幕府を倒すため患者役をしろって西国の藩のやつらに脅されたんだ。俺たちの父様は静かに暮らしたいから協力できないとその脅しを突っぱねた。そうしたらああやって里に火をかけられたのさ。
What Kaoru spoke of was a memory I had sealed away to live my life. Oh, I had sealed away to live my life, up until recently, as a human. But all of it was coming back to me. All of his anger and acrimony? Word that I don't know. It's too big. It was justified.
ぬるま湯に浸って生きてきたお前もようやく分かってくれたか。
Kaoru's eyes shifted to look far into the distance.
これでやっと俺たちは同じになれる。本当の兄弟に戻れるんだ。俺が長い時間をかけて味わってきた苦しみをお前はこの短い間に経験した。俺たちは誰よりも互いの気持ちを分かり合えるはずだよ。そうだろう。
Kaoru turned to face me again, and his eyes had a melancholic sincerity behind them. What do you hope to do?
決まってるじゃないか。俺は故郷で雪村一族を再興する。人間たちに奪われた暮らしを取り戻すんだ。俺の家族や里のみんなを虐げた奴らを許さない。俺たちの苦境を知っても手を差し伸べようとすらしなかった西国の鬼たちも。そしてこの国にはびこる薄汚い人間どもも。
Kaoru began to burn with a potent rage. However, becoming privy to the reasoning behind all of this inner turmoil made me realize I was no longer afraid of him. If anything, I could only feel for him.
行動のおじさんが改良してくれた落ち水を使えば火の元で動ける羅刹の軍を作れる。
I froze. Kaoru, is father with you?
ああ、彼は俺たちの遠縁の親戚だからね。雪村一族再興のため協力は惜しまないって言ってくれてるよ。新しい落ち水を飲むとさ、人と交わって血が薄まった鬼でも鬼本来の力を取り戻すことができるんだ。その落ち水で俺たちの仲間をどんどん増やしていけば人間どもどころか西国の鬼たちだって敵じゃない。俺たちはこの日の元の新たな名士になることができるんだよ。
Kaoru reached his hand out to mine.
千鶴、俺と一緒に行こう。
What? Kaoru sprung his proposition on me. This was no joke from Kaoru. He was dead serious.
分かったんだろう。お前が望むなら沖田も一緒でいい。邪魔な奴らを全て根絶やしにして、この国に俺たちの本当の居場所を作ろう。
Just as Sen had predicted, Father was continuing his research on the water of life, even after leaving the Shinsengumi. Perhaps Father had the key to curing the affliction inside Okita and restoring his humanity. And together, perhaps we could create a new home for ourselves, one where we could live in peace. If this was one chance to give myself the promise of a better future, was it worth it to accept? Before I could answer Kaoru,
僕は行かないよ。絶対に行かない。
a familiar voice responded in the distance, and at once I was snapped back to reality.
千鶴ちゃん、君って本当にお人よしなんだね。うまい話には裏があるって言うでしょ。こんな奴の言うこと信じちゃダメだよ。
Okita emerged from the trees, standing in front of me to confront Kaoru directly. Kaoru, however, seemed to have anticipated Okita's arrival, and he grinned suggestively.
今すぐ答えが欲しいわけじゃない。可愛い妹が悩む時間くらいはあげるよ。俺たちは故郷で待ってる。たどり着くまでに答えを決めておくんだね。
待て！
Okita immediately unsheathed his sword and attempted to swipe quickly at Kaoru. Kaoru read Okita's movements easily, narrowly avoiding the attack as it grazed the fabric of his sleeve.
それじゃあな、千鶴。いい返事を期待してるよ。
Then Kaoru vanished from sight, melting into the air.
まったく、逃げ足だけは早いな。
Okita sounded irritated as he sheathed his sword back into its scabbard.
千鶴ちゃん、何をぼーっとしてるの？もしかしてあいつの口車に乗ろうなんて考えてるんじゃないよね。
Well,
あのさ、今のうちに言っておくけど。
Okita slowly stepped towards me. Just then, Okita's face scrunched in pain and he wrapped his arms around his body as he yelped desperately. Okita! In the blink of an eye, Okita's hair became stark white, and his irises once again became crimson. It's time for round 4. The madness of the fury struck him once more, and this time it was aiming for his heart. However, an enormous feeling shot through me. Another dizzy spell pulsed in my head. It became difficult to see clearly. My heartbeat had one ferocious pound, and then... Suddenly, I craved blood. I craved Okita's blood. My cravings began to dominate my mind, as if my entire body screamed to tear Okita limb from limb. It was an I'm never gonna say this right, animalistic desire that became impossible to resist with each passing moment. The thirst came from within. It was innate, and it needed to be quenched immediately. My forehead burned unbearably all of a sudden. I instinctively reached to touch it when my fingers felt something firm. Oh no. What was this? My hair, which was tied into a bun on top of my head, became undone and fell to my shoulders. From the corner of my eye, I saw my hair flicker. It turned white. No! I shook violently from fear. As I reached to touch my forehead once more, I felt two horns begin to poke through the flesh, slowly inching themselves above the surface. No. Am I really a demon? Was this because of the water of life? White hair and horns stabbing through my forehead? My soul, my body, both were becoming corrupted by the serum's poisonous effects. The pain was abruptly punctuated by a desperate thirst. A tickling sensation began to irritate every inch of my skin, making me want to scratch uncontrollably. No! Then a hand gently grabbed a hold of my shoulders. I was too embarrassed to let Okita see me like this, and I couldn't bear to turn and face him. Don't look at me. Okita was silent. Please, don't look at me. After I let out my sheepish whimper, he responded with a calm demeanor.
千鶴ちゃん、血が欲しいの？
No! I can't! All I could do was shake my head, fighting helplessly to suppress my cravings. He grabbed both of my arms and forced me to face back at him. There he was. In front of me stood a demon who resembled what I was slowly transforming into. However, he had no horns on his head. But just like me, his hair turned white, and he looked ravenous for the taste of blood. I wasn't alone. The knowledge of this overwhelmed me. I wasn't alone.
僕の羅刹の血は君を今以上に羅刹に近づけてしまうかもしれない。
Okita breathed in a strained, pained staccato.
それだけは少し怖いけど、でも君が望むなら僕は拒まない。
Okita, I bit my lip aggressively and I unsheathed my kodachi. And then...
千鶴ちゃん、何を？
Please, take a sip. I cut along the length of my palm and I offered my bloody hand to Okita. You want blood, right? Please, drink mine.
でも君だって血が欲しいんじゃないの？
Well, it's not as if I don't. My throat suddenly became dry and scratchy from thirst, which only worsened my cravings. But I don't need it. What I truly wanted was a reprieve from this suffocating appetite. It was driving me mad. I tried to think of a joyful moment, a time when we could live life peacefully away from these impulses. Hopefully, Okita and I could carve a future where the serum's poisonous effects no longer held us hostage. I'm a demon, and even though I was forced into drinking the water of life, numbness started trickling throughout my body, perhaps trying to coax me into quenching my thirst. But even still, I don't need blood. I just wanted to live by Okita's side.
そっか。わかった。いい子だね。君は。
Okita whispered softly, and he grabbed a hold of my hand heartedly. Okita looked vigorously around each corner, touched by blood on the surface of my hand.
僕であるために君の血を飲む。狂ってしまわないように。
Okita tickled my ear with his torpid tone, utterly enthralled by the soothing taste of my blood. My body, on the other hand, was still aching, longingly with bloodlust. But even so, watching him take such a lucid pleasure from lapping up my blood, I nodded firmly. And I won't drink your blood, so that I can keep my wits about me. This was my burden to bear.
君は強い子だね。
A slight pinch shot up my arm as Okita sucked in one more generous mouthful, then let out a deep sigh.
でもきっともうじきだから。
Okita's reassuring words made me realize how much he worked to keep me from giving into the madness. He and I leaned heavily onto one another, and I did my best to endure the seren's poisonous effects. And through it all, Okita held my hand tightly. He kept me safe until the very end. Excuse me for a second. I actually got lightheaded. A little bit. Not fully, but just a little bit. Also genuinely thirsty. There we go. It's still there. I was just waiting for that moment. I was waiting for it. Waiting for when Chizuru would actually get the bloodlust, and it happened. Oh, it happened. I was just sitting there waiting patiently for it. I hadn't considered how much colder the north was. Despite the incoming summer season, the blustery winds were freezing all throughout the night.
もうすぐ夜が明けるし、今日はこの辺で休むことにしようか。思ったより時間かからなかったね。こういう時、羅刹の体って便利だな。
We were only a ways away from the village where I was born, the village of the Yukimura clan.
明日には君のお父さんや南雲薫と再会できるだろうけど、彼らになんて返事をするか決めた？
Well,
その様子だとまだ決めてないんだ。迷う必要なんてなさそうなのに。
Okita.
何？
Nandemonai. I wanted to ask him what he had planned to do once he encountered them as well. But first, I had to settle on an answer for Kaoru. Or else, I knew that my feelings won't reach Kaoru.
千鶴ちゃん、ちょっと一緒に来てくれる？
Follow you? Where?
ついてくればわかるよ。ほら。
Hey! Okita quickly grabbed a hold of my hand before walking away through a forested path. Where could he have been taking me? He gave me no chance to object, and he continued his brisk pace down the grassy knoll. What? Okita brought us underneath a canopy that had a dazzling view of the stars scattered across the dusky sky. My cheeks were tingled by the caress of the soft breeze.
今日はよく晴れてるから君の気分も変えてあげられると思って。昼間の景色もいいけどこういう眺めも悪くないでしょ。
It was all that Okita said and more. I marveled in awe at the countless stars flickering brilliantly. The wind gently rustled the leaves overhead, allowing each brief glimmering sconce to peek through the tiny holes in the trees. Something so simple became a moment that I could cherish for the rest of my life. Thank you for this, Okita. This is what I needed.
どういたしまして。ってなんか水臭いな。
Okita cackled to himself, and he looked me directly in the eye.
話してごらん。君はどうしたいの？
I still hadn't settled on a decision, but I took a deep breath to gather my thoughts. I don't blame Kaoru for holding on to those feelings of resentment for as long as he has. He lost everything, his home, his family, and his entire clan for nothing, all because of the selfishness of others. He wants to carve a better future for himself. I'm sure if I were Kaoru, I wouldn't be too far off. Kaoru had attempted to manipulate me at so many opportunities, but now I knew the pain that he had resided deeply within him was true. That doesn't mean that I've forgotten how many times he's crossed me, of course. After all, Kaoru is the reason that both Okita and I were suffering the effects of the water of life. But at the end of the day, Kaoru is still my brother. I was unsure if a time would come where I could forgive him for all that he had done to us. But my mind jumped to the horrific thought of having to endure the rest of my life without Okita. I realized that I, too, could become as bitter as Kaoru, cursing and hating everything that had the misfortune of entering my line of sight. Keeping this in mind, I couldn't quite bring myself to condemn Kaoru either, or entirely.
君は彼らと一緒に生きたい？
I hesitated to answer his question. It wasn't as though I never considered it an option. We Furies were unable to live an ordinary life alongside humans. If we were destined to live behind the shadows of mankind, perhaps residing with Kaoru was best. Still, I held on to my reservations. Kaoru is seeking to reclaim some glorious life he has idolized at the expense of many others. That is something I cannot agree with. So if I could maybe convince him to give up on this dream to create this demon-run kingdom.
随分と都合のいい話だね。邪魔者を根絶やしにしてでも自分たちの居場所を作りたいと思ってる彼らが。そんな甘い願いなんて聞き入れてくれると思う？
Well,
世の中にはね、人の醜い部分や汚い部分ばかりを見せつけられながら生きてきた人間っていうのがいるんだよ。そんな相手に甘っちょろい綺麗事なんて通用しないと思うけどね。
Okita was right. I had no rebuttal. These emotions had festered for so long in Kaoru. His entire life was spent working towards exacting his revenge upon the humans to rebuild his clan. Entertaining the idea of putting a halt to his vengeful plans would have been out of the question. Like Okita said, I am naive. During a pause in our conversation, Okita turned back to face the stars.
僕は君の望みを叶えてあげたかったんだ。
え？
だからもし君がどうしてもって言うなら、少しだけ付き合ってあげようかとも思った。だって君がいてくれなかったら、僕はこうして生きてるかどうかもわからないから。
Okita's eyes thinned, and there was no hint of sarcasm in his voice. He was trying to comfort me. To Okita, it was Kondo-san for whom he had worked his entire life. And now that Kondo-san had been taken from him, I was sure Okita had no real objection to dying at any moment now. The fact he was alive right now must mean...
僕は君が望むものを与えてあげたい。本当に欲しいと思ってるものをね。だからカオルの誘いには絶対に乗っちゃダメだ。人間を根絶やしにして自分たちの王国を築くなんて君は望んでないでしょ。
Okita had a knack for articulating my inner thoughts far better than I ever could.
それとも化け物になっちゃったからって何もかも諦めてずっと暗い闇の中で生きていく。
I was speechless. Okita paid no mind as he continued without waiting for me to answer.
そんな生き方君には似合わないよ。君が良くても僕が絶対に許さない。世の中にはね、絶対に暗闇へ落ちちゃいけない人っていうのがいるんだ。
Okita. I didn't want to live the rest of my life as a fury. I didn't want to kill any humans. All I had wanted was a life of peace. Okita helped me remember that that was my dream all along. He saw right through me, sensing that I was beginning to slip away because I had drunk the water of life.
落ち水の毒を消す方法さえ分かれば、君も僕も狂気から解放される。君は君のままだ。化け物なんかじゃない。
Did he just... He just repeated our words back to us. From Kyoto. Oh. Was that so much to ask for? To be free of this curse? When Sanan-san was still with the Shinsengumi, he had spent years searching for a cure. In the end, he was unsuccessful. Okita knew this. But against all of the odds, he put his faith in whatever sliver of hope he had.
それでも、もしも君がすべて諦めて願いを放り出すって言うんなら。
Okita reached his hand to me kindly. The soft touch of his finger gave me goosebumps, and he stared back at me affectionately.
僕が君を殺してあげるよ。君が前に進むことまで諦めるつもりなら、どこにも行けないように僕が終わらせてあげる。
By this point, I wasn't sure just how many times Okita had threatened to kill me. But this must have been the first ever time that he said it in such a kind-hearted manner. Knowing that his words came from a well-intentioned place made my heart flutter warmly. Okita.
殺されたくないんなら諦めることなんて考えちゃダメだよ。僕だってその後君なしで生きていけるほど強くはないんだから。僕は最後まで諦めない。だから君も僕と一緒に。
The cadence of his voice was almost nervous. Perhaps Okita had been unsure of what I was feeling, so he gazed deeply into my eyes. Looking at his expression, I wanted to make his wishes come true as well. I won't give up. My forehead burned hotly as if I were coming down with a fever. Tears began to stream from my face, but they hadn't come from anything close to resembling sadness. It was all because Okita felt that I was still worth saving, and that he wouldn't let me fall into darkness. Even if preserving meant that our road ahead wouldn't be a difficult one, it was the road we needed. I want to keep going. With you, Okita. There was no hope in containing myself anymore, and I grabbed a hold of him madly.
ありがとう。君ならきっとそう言ってくれると思ってたよ。
Okita embraced me warmly in return. The sweet sensation of his breath tickled my forehead before he whispered into my ear.
ずっと一緒にいよう。何があってもずっと僕から離れないで。
His hand sweetly grazed the side of my cheek. Oh boy. As if he were nudging me, I timidly shut my eyes in anticipation. He let out a quiet sigh, and he put his tender lips against mine in one calm, confident movement. I could feel his fingers tremble nervously, as if he were touching something so fragile it would crumble at the slightest touch. Okita always had a witty, sarcastic response, opting to let his mouth do the talking, but now there was no words from him, and together we basked in this intimate moment. He had been treating me so dearly. For once in my life, I felt whole, the thought of which nearly brought my tears. Our lips shook slightly, nestled in our passionate kiss. I was sure that the same thoughts running through me were running through Okita as well. Just thinking about how complete he made me feel. It convinced me there was no greater love than ours. My future was his future, ours, together. I pined ever so to continue being by his side, and would do whatever it takes to keep him. I would follow him until the end of time. As these thoughts burned so fiercely inside of me, so too did our kiss intensify, and each breath between our zealous smacking grew more strained and sinuous. As our first kiss came to its end, we hesitantly stepped back from one another. Our footsteps echoed in the emptiness surrounding us, met only with the pleasant whistle of the night wind. However, the silence made me feel a tad uneasy, so I searched for words to break the tension, but as soon as I became conscious of his fingers interlocked with mine, my mind went blank.
名残惜しいけど、ずっとこのままってわけにもいかないんだよね。少し寝た方がいいんだろうけど。 目が冴えちゃったな。
Ah. Okita once again turned to gaze longingly at the glittering stars above, and I followed suit. Tomorrow, I would sever my ties with my twin brother, as well as the man whom I had believed to be my father. Could I really do it? Could I stop them?
ねえ、千鶴ちゃん。
As I heard Okita call my name, my chest felt warm, and I looked at him with wide eyes.
そんな不安な顔しなくてもいいよ。気持ちはもう決まってるでしょ。
Well, of course.
君はどう考えてるかわからないけど、僕は戦うのを怖いと思ったことなんて一度もないし、彼らを殺すことへのためらいもない。
I nodded. I had watched Okita's prowess on the battlefield many times before now. Okita was always full of confidence, never letting his hot-headedness get the better of him in a duel.
近藤さんが生きてた頃は目的なんて別にいらなかった。新選組の剣として命じられるまま、ただ目の前の敵を切ればよかっただけだから。だからどんな汚い役目だって堂々と胸を張ってこなせたんだ。でも近藤さんがいなくなった今、僕が剣を振るう理由はたった一つしかない。
And then Okita looked down towards me.
君のためだよ、千鶴ちゃん。
Okita.
こういう生き方を選んだのは僕だし、迷いなんてない。後悔もしない。だけど今までは先を望んだことなんてなかったから。
As he muttered those words softly, I couldn't help but be taken aback by his apathetic confession.
別に生き急いでたわけじゃないし、寂しい生き方をしてたとは思わないんだけど、結局今まで僕は先のことなんて何一つ考えてなかったってことだろうね。
I finally seemed to understand the hesitancy behind Okita's treatment of myself. This conflict within myself, this emerging resolve to fight for me, was an entirely new experience for him. So the battle between us and my family is also the battle to determine a future for ourselves, yes? Which means that defeat is not an option. This is the fight for our right to stay together, forever. Okita silently nodded.
この僕が未来のために戦うことになるなんて思わなかったけどね。今まで思ってもみなかったことが次々と浮かんでくるんだ。
Oops. What do you mean?
例えばこの戦いが終わったらどこで生きていけばいいんだろうとか。
That is a question. He's right. We no longer had a space we could call home. If we were to search for a place to live, could Okita, as a former captain of the Shinsengumi, find a place where he could live reclusively?
そんな顔しなくてもいいじゃない。君を落ち込ませるために言ったんじゃないんだから。
Right. Sorry.
ねえ、千鶴ちゃん。
Okita paused at first, and I sensed his mind working as I gazed into his beautiful emerald eyes. I waited intently for him to continue. But as our eyes connected, suddenly it felt as though time was suspended, and my heart pounded furiously. My cheeks became hot from blushing. Within his irises, I saw myself in a flickering twinkle of green.
どうして目をそらしちゃうの？もしかして警戒してる？
Don't be so mean.
意地悪って言われても、僕はずっと前からこんな感じだったでしょ。でもまあ、どうせ意地悪って言われるんなら、もう一度君に口づけしてもいい？
His remark came from nowhere, and I froze. We just kissed.
さっき口づけしたら、もうしちゃいけないの？
Well,
僕が聞きたいのは、君が僕を受け入れてくれるのかくれないのか、それだけなんだけど。
why can't you just say those words the first time around?
ちゃんと答えて。どっち？
Did I really have to answer his question? I mean, I've always known Okita to be quite free with his sarcasm, but I said, Oh. Oh. Well, I think there's a time and place for everything.
時と場合？どんな時ならいいの？
Huh? Well... Okita approached closer to me as if my saying yes were a sure deal, and I flinched nervously. Well... I hadn't the faintest clue of how to respond, whereas Okita wore his crooked smirk proudly because of course he fucking would.
そういう姿を見てると、ますますいじめたくなるんだよ。
Okita reached his hand out to grab a hold of me by the wrists. No. His sudden movement caught me by surprise.
いいから、何も言わないで。
His eyes were fervently locked with mine. I panicked, attempting to step back and free my hands, but Okita would not let go. Okita?
君は本当ならもっと優しくて穏やかな未来を与えてくれる相手を選んだ方が幸せだったのかもね。
I noticed that Okita's voice seemed to drop, and I became a little unnerved as he continued. His eyes no longer seemed to bear within them their typical earnestness, but rather Okita seemed incensed for a reason that I couldn't identify.
千鶴ちゃん、僕はね、きっと君をとても困らせると思う。もし君がいつか僕を選んだことを後悔する日が来たとしても、手放してはあげられない。
His playful demeanor had all but vanished. What had surfaced in its stead was Okita's confession that he acknowledged his fear of losing my love. But in spite of this fear, he would keep his resolve to fight.
僕は君が死ぬまで一緒にいてあげることはできないかもしれない。ほんのわずかな未来はあげられても、その先まではわからない。それでも。
His quivering mouth tickled the inside of my ear, and I could feel him mad with hot energy.
それでも僕は君を求めるよ。 命ある限りこうして君に触れ続ける。君を傷つけることになってもどうしても止められないんだ。
I knew that sharing these sentiments did not come easily to Okita, and he cupped my face tightly. Okita, just as I was going to respond, I was interrupted by the touch of his moist lips. I won't let you say anything. I don't want you to say anything. Through the sensation of his wet, eager mouth, I could gather that this is what he'd wanted to say. Our plump lips smeared against one another, and he pulled at a fistful of my hair, drawing me deeper into him as he bit forcefully into my lower lip. This kiss was different. I could feel it in the rhythm of his muscles, bitter and yet ever so sweet.
Hello, Iron Enjoyer.
Okita was not afraid of fighting, of dying. Even if our adversaries were members of my own family, he could swing his sword without a second thought. But even so, that he had given it any thought at all, knowing that my well-being could be at risk, meant the world to me. And his kiss had communicated to me all of the subtleties that words could not quite express. After indulging for a moment, brief as it ever was, in the intimacy of each other's lips, there seemed to be something Okita needed answered. So the minute our lips separated, I answered him with a great deal of confidence. I do not mind putting up with anything you might do to me, Okita. I will always forgive you, even knowing that our time together could be a limited one.
そんなこと言って僕がいなくなったら絶対泣くくせに。
That may be true. But I know at least I won't have any regrets, no matter what happens from here.
そういうの殺し文句って言うんだよ。
Well, you always said you would kill me, right? Now we're even.
まったく君って子は。
Okita stroked my hair tenderly, staring back into my eyes longingly, as if this were a fond farewell. Perhaps the thought of our separation had hit him, and he had taken it to heart in this moment. Let's get some sleep soon. We'll need all the rest we can to prepare for tomorrow.
そうだね。
As we lied upon the ground, Okita spooned me, wrapping his arms under mine and nestled into my neck. Even if whatever happened tomorrow proved to be a conclusive end, it was no guarantee of a bright future. However, even keeping this in mind, Okita and I were supporting each other through and through, and we were heading for my village. Even in the face of death, or any hardships conjured under the vengeful eye of my brother, as long as Okita was beside me, I am not afraid of anything. My unwavering resolve made me stronger. The very next evening, I need water. Holy shit. I didn't expect two scenes like that back to back. Wow. Anyway, now that I'm not in the middle of the scene, Iron Enjoyer, welcome to the stage. I hope you enjoy your stay and the show. So, very next evening, as we continue on and almost finish this route, we had finally arrived at the village of my origin, the village of the Yukimura. Within it were the people who had been waiting my return for quite some time.
おかえり千鶴。ずいぶん久しぶりだね。まさかこの里でお前と再会できるとは思わなかったよ。
Father. A wave of nostalgia washed over me from seeing my father for the first time in 5 years. However, I was no longer the clueless girl I used to be, and I hadn't found myself rushing up to him happily.
こうしてここに来てくれたってことは答えは出たってことだろうけど、どうする？俺たちと共に来るかい？
薫君から話は聞いているね。我々が再びこの日の本の支配者となる日が来たのだよ。共に新たな鬼の王国を作り上げよう。
Father. Something in Father's words rang eerily to me. It sounded as though he was more excited by the prospect of usurping power rather than their initial proposition to rebuild the Yukimura clan.
千鶴、顔色が良くないようだな。まさかお前、血を絶っているのではないだろうね。分かっているだろうが、お前の体はすでに落ち水によって作り変えられてしまっている。血を飲まなくてはたちまち正気を失ってしまうよ。
Father took a tone that reminded me of when he would admonish me as a child. I couldn't let myself dwell on the nostalgia because there was something nefarious afoot in his behavior.
何をためらってるんだろうね。せっかくだから沖田を殺して血を吸えばよかったのに。
そうだな。そうするべきだ。羅刹などいくらでも作り出せるのだから。
After Okita listened to them speak, he began to bark with laughter before turning to ask something of me.
千鶴ちゃん、どうしようか。君のためなら僕の命くらいあげてもいいんだけど。
Boy! I will not give up. Not until the very end. I made a vow to you, remember? We were either going to break the curse of the water of life together, or not at all. Losing Okita more than any mere serum could would undo my sanity and give me no reason to live.
そうだね。君はこんな馬鹿げた提案に乗るような女の子じゃない。
千鶴、まさか。
Kaoru glared back at me with cold eyes, refusing to speak lest he unleash his anger. If I were to guess, he was anticipating my answer even before I said it out loud. I confidently faced him and Father and stood tall. I cannot join the two of you. Kaoru let out a deep sigh.
千鶴、お前は血を分けた兄も故郷も育ての親も何もかも捨てるつもりか。そこまでして男を選ぶなんてとんだ薄情者だな。起きたなんてただの人間じゃないか。しかも病で近いうちにくたばる上、落ち水のせいで狂い始めてる。
Kaoru, don't you dare speak ill of Okita. I couldn't stand to stay silent as Kaoru shamelessly slandered Okita in front of me. There was a slight hesitation before saying this aloud before Father and Kaoru, but I love Okita. That does not mean that either of you mean nothing to me. But Okita has a special place in my heart. If I were to commit to this relationship, then it meant I needed to separate myself from my family. I want to spend the rest of my life with Okita. I have no desire for an army of furies or a demon kingdom. I have no desire to crave a life that comes at the expense of hurting others.
俺たちのやり方は間違ってるっていうのか。両親を殺され、里を奪われ、女鬼じゃないって理由で同じ鬼にまで散々虐げられたのに。俺の人生をめちゃくちゃにした奴らへの復讐すら考えるなって。俺たちは一生虐げられる側に甘んじてろっていうのか。
Kaoru. If only Kaoru had found someone who mattered to him like Okita mattered to me. This was all I could think of to soothe his anger. Or his rage, rather. But like all things, I suppose, this was only a naive wish. Even so, there was no way to convince myself that Kaoru was just in his reasoning. Kaoru, of course, continued his tirade.
お前らだけ何もなかったように幸せに暮らすなんて、兄さんはどうしても許せないな。
It seemed as though we became the targets of Kaoru's ire. Even though the same blood flowed through our veins, Kaoru and I shared no common goal or thread of life.
俺は俺の目的を果たす。たとえ可愛い妹を泣かせることになってもね。
I know, but that's why we...
力ずくでも君たちを止めさせてもらうよ。僕たちにも叶えなきゃならない夢があるから。
Then our two groups leapt back to make ground. Father, please, wake up. What gives you the right to kill so needlessly, just to create a world for demons? Even though our clan was destroyed by humans, we had no right or claim to something more than anyone else in this country. Deep down, I knew Father believed this as well. Father, you're a doctor. You've spent your life helping countless others. Don't you remember how many patients you treated in Edo? All those times they thanked you?
それは
I knew Father could not attribute the evils committed against our people to every human. So, as long as he could learn to forgive, then he could continue to live in the company of humans. I know that humans and demons can still coexist peacefully. Just like how we used to live peacefully in Edo.
千鶴お前
I saw Father's eyes flicker. There was still goodness inside of him.
お前は本当に甘いね。人間たちとの争いを避けようとして、俺たちの一族を滅ぼされたんじゃないか。
So, what? If you keep this up, all you're doing is perpetuating the same cycle of violence. If, and only if, we were to wipe all of the humans from this country using the Furies, any humans who survive will come to resent us. Kaoru, do you want to create more orphans like us?
じゃあ、どうしろって言うんだ。俺一人が過去にされた理不尽な所業を忘れて我慢すればいいっていうのか。悪いけど俺はそこまで善人にはなれないな。前に言っただろう。強いやつが報われるんじゃない。正しいやつが成功するんじゃない。最後に笑うのはどんな時でも手段を選ばずに小ずるく立ち回ったやつだけだってね。
Kaoru took something out of his pocket. It was The moment I saw him pull out a glass vial, I felt something shudder from deep within my soul. Kaoru! Kaoru merely grinned maliciously before opening the vial and gulping its contents in one deep sip. He clutched madly at his throat. Suddenly his hair turned white, and from his scalp I watched the thick horn raise itself. Why? Why? Why would you drink the water of life?
落ち水で鬼の肉体を強化するにはどれくらいの濃さが必要になるか確かめるのは簡単だったらしいよ。可愛い妹が実験台になってくれたからね。
What? Kaoru willingly drank the water of life just to obtain more power? Was that it? How could he be so unaware of the path to which he was now fully committed?
起きたが弱くないことは俺だってよく知ってるからさ。だからってここで負けるわけにはいかない。こんなところで殺されたら今までの俺の人生が本当に無意味になるからな。
Kaoru clasped his hands around his katana's hilt, drawing it in one swift motion. In return, Okita unsheathed his gift from Kondo.
よくわかるよ、その気持ち。もし負けたら、僕を捨てた姉上、そして僕を虐げた兄弟子たちや、僕を憐れんで見下した奴らを喜ばせるだけだ。僕も近藤さんに会うまではずっとそうやって生きてきたから。だからこそ彼女に同じ思いをさせるわけにはいかない。僕はこの子と生きなくちゃいけない。だから絶対に負けられない。それだけだ。
Okita! My heart fluttered at the sound of Okita's dedication played repeatedly in my head. It was a sentiment that I shared with him.
バカじゃないのか。
Kaoru growled angrily, throwing himself at Okita. Each clash of their blades produced bright sparks. Becoming a fury must have increased his strength to an unfathomable degree. Both his speed and the force of his strikes came with an increased velocity, and Kaoru swung madly at Okita. Okita, however, was able to dodge each of Kaoru's advances with ease, and he put distance between them.
たとえ俺に勝ったところでお前なんてすぐにくたばるよ。羅刹の力は寿命を削るって知ってるだろう。ただでさえ老害で残り少ない寿命があとどれくらい残ってるんだろうな。
Yet again, Kaoru flailed his blade wantonly, hoping to gravely wound Okita, but Okita evaded all of his strikes.
知ってるよ。だけど残り少ない命ならなおさら君に渡すわけにはいかない。
The electrifying rhythm of their fiercely contested battle made it difficult to keep up. Tension made the air thick with rot and despair.
次の一投で決めさせてもらう。死に損ないにこれ以上時間を取られるわけにはいかないからな。
望むところだよ。
Oh, shit. Both of them kicked at the ground at the same time. In the space of a flash, each combatant struck the other. Okita was struck in his bicep, and blood flowed freely from the wound, spilling onto the ground below. This did little to stop Okita, however, and he returned the favor by slicing the middle of Kaoru's abdomen. Abdomen! Kaoru's body was scarred by Okita's well-aimed strike. A strange and disconcerting sight indeed. Oh shit. As we had expected, this fight was life or death. Rather than waiting for their injuries to heal, both men exploded a fire resolve to see their opponents hacked into pieces until he no longer resembled anything human. Eventually, oh shit. Kaoru looked capable of fighting, if just a bit more. But Okita appeared to have exhausted every last bit of energy he had left, as he could barely stand. Then Kaoru raised his bloody sword when... Kaoru! Don't! I refused to stay quiet, and I screamed out to Kaoru in hopes of stopping him. There's no more need to fight. Do you plan on doing this forever? Neither Okita nor I want to kill you. All we want is to cease the senseless fighting and to find a cure for the water of life. After shrieking at me, Kaoru began to charge towards me. I had to find a way out of his path. His fury and his speed was beyond comprehension, and I had no chance to escape. Okita tried helplessly to run right behind Kaoru, but by then Kaoru was practically arm's length from me. Then, just as I had embraced the thought of death, a body had flung itself frantically in front of me. A very familiar voice screamed right within earshot. Father? Father, the man who had raised me since I was a young girl, sacrificed his body, which was punctured brutally by Kaoru's sword. Father, you protected me. He said nothing. All he offered in response was the same stern expression I'd seen and known my entire life. Kaoru, on the other hand, seemed merely inconvenienced as he kicked his foot against Father's body to extract his sword. As Father's body slowly descended towards the ground, I reached my arms to keep him upright. And then... in the very next moment... Okita drove his blade directly into Kaoru's heart with ruthless conviction. With that, Kaoru's body dropped to the cold ground. His eyes were empty, and as his limbs sprawled across the dirt, he looked incapable of standing. Kaoru gazed lifelessly into the distance, letting out a pained exhale. And then quietly, he shut his eyes, for his life was over. Kaoru. Although I believe I had been prepared to see this, watching it unfold before my very eyes was far more difficult than I could bear to stomach. Sorrow found its place inside my heart, as if a piece of me had died alongside Kaoru. At the end, we were unable to come together. If only I could have known more about him. This regret would come to haunt me, I imagined, and I gritted my teeth as the reality took shape in my mind. Luckily, I had Okita to comfort me. Okita called out to me, and I turned around. I see tears, so I must have this one. Hopefully that's the correct button. It's the correct button, alright. Father, whose skin was as pale as what? Father, whose skin was as pale as a porcelain doll, also called out to me. My fear was that as soon as I would speak, I would begin to cry uncontrollably, but somehow I fought back the tide of tears and I answered him. Yes, Father, I am here. Father's brows widened in relief. Without saying anything, I took hold of Father's hand. It was icy to the touch. He must have lost a significant amount of blood by now. His condition was critical enough that even if he were to receive medical attention, it would be too late. Father, you're only going to tire yourself. Please, you don't need to strain yourself by talking. What? With his very last bit of strength, he gave us a solution for which we had been searching all along. Father. Blood may have been thicker than water, but there was a bond between us that was unbreakable, all the same. When I was still a young girl, I had memories of my kind father, carrying me on his back as we sped down the mountain trail. You will always be my father, no matter what, even if not by blood. This is a promise. You are the only father I ever had, the only man I am honored to give that distinction. Hearing my promise, Father smiled faintly. He drew one last breath, seemingly at peace. I braced myself to accept the loss of these men, but I did nothing to stifle my grief. Could anything? Kaoru, my estranged twin brother who died before either of us could get to know the other. Father, who always seemed to wish the best for me, even until his dying breath. These lamentable thoughts swirled tirelessly. Both of them were surely men that would impact my life for as long as I live. My promise to them, if I could, would be to preserve their memory. I will not let them go forgotten. Then Okita softly put his hand on my shoulder. He tenderly ran his fingers along the length of my scalp before patting me like he would a child.
泣いてもいいよ、千鶴ちゃん。
Okita. In the next moment, Okita wrapped his arms around my fragile frame, embracing me tightly. His body served as conduit, through which my inner frustrations were channeled and brought to the surface. Okita! Okita! Despite my relief in seeing Okita safe, having it come at the expense of my family gave me heartache. Would I ever be able to shake this remorse? In spite of my best efforts, I started bawling madly.
今日はよく頑張ったね。君は本当に強い子だ。剣じゃなくて心の強さだったら僕なんかよりずっと強くなっちゃったかもしれないね。
His method of comforting me was what one would likely expect when speaking with a child, but he still knew how to tell me what I needed to hear most. The fact alone that he wouldn't hold back the truth from me made my love for him burn even hotter, and my tears streamed without restraint. And oh, right. Okay. Reach credits. I think Okita, after knowing the routes that I have completed, which is Yamazaki and Saito off stream, Kazuma Nakakura, and now Okita, I am pretty sure that Okita is in the top 6 somewhere. I don't know quite where to place him now that I finished his route entirely. Also, Mori Kubo is just too damn great at voicing Okita. I don't know where to place him yet because I need to finish some other ones. And of course, we still have the epilogue after the credits, which we shall watch. Ah. Hold on for a second. Why do you mean there's only one translator for the localization? Huh? So there was one director, one translator, one editor for this entire game. 2 games, technically. What the fuck? No wonder there's a lot of errors. Alright. Final chapter. The sky sparkled clearly, and besides us, there was a stream of pure water. As we found ourselves surrounded by a lush meadow and thick trees, our bodies began to feel a change. By the time the crescent moon had risen alongside a sea of stars, we could finally lay our heads at rest, and for once in a long while, we woke to a bright morning. Our lives were no longer constricted by our murderous thirst for blood, and we regained the peaceful lives for which we had pined for so long. Thankfully, we were still blessed with some of the heightened features that came with drinking the serum. Of course, there was things that hadn't changed at all. We were still us. Okita hadn't fully recovered from his tuberculosis. The illness still ate away at his body. But even so, I took solace that I could spend a day as delightful as today was with him. Her hair is down again! Okay. I'm sorry, I have to say that every time I see it. Because Chizuru is barely with her hair down ever. It's always tied in some way. Sure is beautiful, isn't it? I squinted as I turned my eyes towards the sunlight, and Okita let out a small chuckle.
そうだね。君と二人きりで日向ぼっこなんて最高の贅沢だ。
Sunlight, which had previously served as a painful curse to Furies, no longer burned our skin. All that changed is our aptitude for naps. So it became customary for us to fall asleep, soaking in the tender warmth of the summer sun. Feeling safe and snug beside Okita's comforting presence was a dream-like kind of bliss. Naturally, as I get a message on fucking Discord, naturally, I couldn't help but yawn. Okita, of course, laughed at the sight.
寝ちゃダメだよ。僕はまだ眠くないから。
But I'm tired already.
君が寝ちゃったら退屈だし。もう少し僕の相手をしてよ。
Hey. I rubbed my aching eyelids softly.
好きだよ。千鶴。
Huh?
君のことが好きだよ。誰とも比べられないぐらい。
Okita reached out to grab me into a tight hug, and he muttered this softly into my ear. As the sensation of his breath tingled my earlobe, suddenly I felt my cheeks blush hotly. That's not fair.
ずるいって何が？僕は自分の気持ちを正直に言っただけだけど。
His fondness for poking fun at me was something he'd likely never let go for as long as we were together. Aww. At first, my expression was pouty, but I couldn't keep from bursting into laughter. Perhaps it was because, for once, we could savor this moment without worry.
君が僕のこと好き？
His question was hushed, as if he were telling me an intimate secret. Then he gazed deeply into my eyes. Well, yes.
はいじゃなくて、君の気持ちをちゃんと言葉で聞かせて。
Okita was grinning impishly, but I took it to mean he was eager to hear my words of affection. Every time he asked me for my feelings, he demanded an immediate answer. He valued my opinion, and he craved my validation. Knowing this to be the case, I felt compelled to give him as honest of an answer as I could. I love you, Soji. More than anything. I saw Okita's face beam with excitement. Watching his cheeks puff happily made me blush harder.
そっか。ありがとう。千鶴。
He wrapped his long, slender fingers around mine. However, he was grasping it more tightly than usual, leading me to wonder. Soji?
忘れないで。僕は いつだって君の幸せを願ってる。
His words were like honey, soft and gooey, but sweet all the same. Excuse me for a second as I shiver at the thought of something gooey on my hands. Yeah. I don't want that. I'll take the soft bit, just leave out the gooey.
君が寂しくないよ。僕はできる限りのことをするから。だから、どうか。
I inched closer to him, anxious about letting any amount of space between us go unfilled. Okita seemed a tad nervous about our future. I, too, was nervous about what the future could hold for the two of us. I'm going to be okay. He held his hand delicately in mine. You complete me, Soji. Because of him, everything that had happened these past years was worth it. I was able to fall in love. You bring me a joy I never knew existed. I don't think I'd feel lonely if I tried. His sad, emotional eyes thinned, and he squeezed a smirk from his lips. After a moment, he wrapped his arms, pulling me in closer to his large, muscular frame.
君のことが心から愛おしい。
He spoke as if uttering a vow.
だから信じて。たとえいつか離れる時が来ても、僕の心は永遠に君のものだ。
His emerald eyes twinkled as he smiled. Then he shut his eyes. His embrace loosened as if only slightly, and he let out a small sigh. Soji? At first, no answer. I suppose he'd spent enough energy making his feelings for me known and he dozed off. Or perhaps the sun's worth made a nap quite the proposition. You just said you weren't tired. I giggled to myself. What was I going to do with him? But I put my lips right beside his ear. I feel the same way about you too. Whatever he had been dreaming must have been a pleasant one as his lips curled into a smile. Even if one day they tear me away from you. I mouthed his words slowly, letting them seep into my heart. My heart belongs to you, eternally. May this warmth live forever. May his arms forever find comfort in my embrace. I whispered these prayers softly to myself, and I shut my eyes in concentration. If he were to wake up, I'm sure that this time he would hear it. I will say it over and over, so that he will never doubt my words of love. Oyasumi, Soji. So until then, sleep well, my love. Okay, that was cute. That was cute. Ugh. Somewhere in the top six. That's it. What do you mean the achievement is called the Cough of the Shinsengumi? What do you mean? That's the name of the Alright. We're done with Soji. And I think last Monday night we had spun the wheel and it landed on Hijikata, so tomorrow we may possibly just start Hijikata. Or it'll be Friday. Anyway, tonight at 9 p.m. EST, it'll be art stream. We'll be continuing the tea drawing that we were working on, and then we'll be animating another preview of Ties of Fates. I would work on the Soji picture, but I kind of don't like it, and I'll redo it at some point. I'll redo the sketch at some point. So, I hope this was enjoyable. I will see you guys next time. Please drink water so that you don't die. And have a nice day. Bye-bye.